This video is going to have a look at determining linear equations. So by the end of the video, you will be able to identify the gradient and y-intercepts and form a linear equation. So the steps for finding a linear rule. Step 1 is to identify the gradient, and the gradient is going to be the slope of the line. So what degree is the line sloping is going to be your gradient. Step 2, identify the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept is going to be where it crosses the y-axis. So where your linear line crosses the y-axis. You can do that by either using a graph, or you can substitute and solve using one of the coordinates that you know that fall along the linear line. Once you have got the gradient and the y-intercept, step 3 will be to write the equation. Before we have a look at an example, remember the general format of a linear equation is going to be y equals mx plus c. M is going to be the gradient, which is the slope of our line, which we find in step 1, and c is going to be the y-intercept, which we find in step 2. So when we are writing our equations for linear lines, it's going to be in the format of y equals mx plus c. So let's go and have a look at a couple of examples of how we can calculate the linear equation based on information provided to us. Example 1, we have got some information and it wants us to determine the equations of the straight line. Now the first one for A, it's a straight line with a gradient of 2 passing through the point of 3 and 7. So our first step is to identify the gradient. And in this one, it's really easy because they explicitly tell us in the question that our gradient is 2. So we've got a gradient of 2. So therefore, our y is equal to 2x plus c. So that is us substituting it into the equation. Y equals 2x plus c. Now need to go ahead and find out what is my y-intercept or my c value. So step 2 is going to be identify the y-intercept. Now I can do that by substituting and solving using the set of coordinates that were provided in the question. So the coordinates were 3 and 7. So when x is equal to 3 and y is equal to 7, I want to find out, use my equation y equals 3x plus c to determine my value of c. So substituting in my x and my y value, 7 is equal to 3 times 3 plus c. So going ahead and solving, 7 is equal to 9 plus c. Subtracting 9 from both sides, negative 2 is equal to c. So now that I have my gradient and my y-intercept, I can go ahead and complete step 3 and write the equation. So my equation is going to be y equals 3x minus 2. And I've substituted in my gradient of 3 and my y-intercept of negative 2. So for A, my equation for my linear line was y equals 3x minus 2. So moving on and having a look at B, we've got a straight line passing through the points of 1 and 6 and 3 and 0. Now my first step is going to be identify the gradient. This time they haven't given us the gradient, so we've got to calculate it. And I can calculate the gradient using the 2 points provided in the question. Before I go ahead and write my formula, I'm going to label my points x1, y1 and x2, y2. This is going to help me to substitute into the formula when I get up to that step. So next I'm going to write my gradient formula, which is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So now I can substitute in my values, y2 minus y1, so 0 minus 6, and x2 minus x1, 3 minus 1. So now that I've substituted, I can go ahead and calculate my gradient. So 0 minus 6 is negative 6, 3 minus 1 is 2, so my gradient is going to be negative 6 over 2, which is equal to negative 3. So I can substitute in my gradient into my standard linear equation, and I know that y equals negative 3x plus c. So now that I have my gradient, I can go ahead and complete step 2, which is to calculate the y-intercept. And I can do that by substituting in one set of points from my question into my equation y equals negative 3x plus c to find out what my c value or my y-intercept value is going to be. So in my question, they have given us 2 points we can choose from. I am going to choose 1 and 6. So therefore, when x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 6, I can work out what c is going to equal. So substituting it into the equation, 6 is going to equal negative 3 times 1 plus c. So 6 is equal to negative 3 plus c. Adding 3 onto both sides, c is equal to 9. So my y-intercept for this equation is going to be equal to 9. Now I could have done the same process with my second set of coordinates, 3 and 0, and would have resulted with the same y-intercept value. So step 3 is going to be to write the equation. So my equation is going to be y equals negative 3x plus 9, substituting in my gradient and my y-intercept value. So let's have a look at a third example. This time we've got a straight line passing through the points of 2 and 5 and 5 and 5. So starting off with step 1, identifying the gradient. So writing your 2 points and labeling them x1, y1, x2, y2. Writing the formula, m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Substituting in the values, so it's going to be 5 minus 5 over 5 minus 2. So completing the calculation, the gradient is going to be 0 over 3, which is equal to 0. So therefore, 0x plus c is going to equal to y. So going ahead with step 2, identify the y-intercept. So I can substitute and solve using one of the coordinates provided in the question. So using the first set of coordinates of 2 and 5, when x is equal to 2 and y is equal to 5, I'm going to substitute in the values. So 5 is going to equal to 0 times 2 plus c. So 5 is equal to 0 plus c. So c is equal to 5. So I've got a gradient of 0 and a y-intercept of 5. So substituting it into the equation, y equals 0x plus 5. Now 0x is equal to 0, so I don't need to include that in my final equation. So y is going to equal to 5. So that means whatever my x value is, y is always going to equal to 5. And I can see that in the 2 points from the question. When x is equal to 2, y is equal to 5. When x is equal to 5, y is equal to 5. So y is equal to 5. So that is some examples of how do we find the linear equation from information provided to us in the question.